Good morning to one and all present, to my fellow students and their respective dignitaries. I am Aman Krishna from Bangalore, here today to share some views on the topic place of provision of service rules. Service tax, being one of the major sources of revenue to the government of India in the form of indirect tax, has become an important topic of discussion in the recent times. Its contribution to the government's revenue has increased steadily year by year and has become tremendous today. In fact, the statistics say that while the amount of service tax collected in the year of its inception was around rupees 400 crores, the same for the year 2012-13 was nearly rupees 1,32,000 crores. This shows how tremendous its growth has been in the years past. Service tax, albeit is considered a simple and felicitous system of taxation, it has its own share of confusions and complexities when it comes to issues like the place of provision of service, the point of taxation, the effective rate of tax to be considered, etc. To clear these confusions, the Ministry of Finance, Government of India, comes up with a certain set of rules which are notified in the official gazette and amended whenever necessary. For example, the place of provision of service rules, the point of taxation rules, etc. Today I would shed some light on one set of such rules called the place of provision of service rules, also called the POPS rules or the POPS rules. The place of provision of service rules came into force on the 1st of July 2012 by notification number 28/2012 of the Ministry of Finance, Government of India. Further, on 11 July 2014, a few minor amendments were made to these rules by notification number 14/2014, and the amended rules were brought into effect from the 1st of October 2014. Thereafter being called the Place of Provision of Service Amendment Rules 2014. Why are these rules issued? What is the relevance of the place of provision of service? Under the new scheme of service tax, the taxability of a service depends on the place where such service is provided, whether in a taxable territory or not. So the basic crux of taxing a service lies on the place of provision of service. Hence, to clear any perplexity in arriving at the place of provision of service, the POPS rules were framed. The place of provision of rules consists of 14 rules on a whole, out of which Rule 1 states the short title, extent, and commencement, and Rule 2 contains definitions of certain important terms that are used in the rules. Rule 3 to Rule 12 are structured by classifying services into different types, while Rule 13 and 14 are general rules and provide additional clarity to the use in the application of the above mentioned rules. The POPS rules are covered under Section 66C, read with Section 94, Subsection 2, Clause HHH of the Finance Act 1994. These rules replace the erstwhile Export of Service Rule 2005, Taxation of Service provided from outside India and received in India Rules 2006. The place of provision of service rules go into the detail of rules. Rule 1, short title, extent and commencement as discussed earlier. Rule 1 states that the rules may be called the place of provision of service Rule 2012 and would come into force from the 1st day of July 2012. However, this rule was amended in the year 2014. Thereafter, these rules have been called the Place of Provision of Service Amendment Rules 2014, which come into force from the 1st day of October 2014. Moving on to Rule 2. Rule 2 contains definitions of about 18 terms that we come across while going through the rules. We'll discuss these definitions wherever these terms appear so that we can have a better understanding of the terms. However, Rule 2 says that in case of words and expressions that are not defined under Rule 2 and appear in the other rules, the other rules will shall have the same definition and meaning as defined in the Act. That is as assigned to them in the Finance Act 1994. So moving on to Rule 3. Rule 3 is called the default rule. It is called the default rule because it says the basic principle of service tax on which we use in the daily computation of service tax. It says that the place of provision of the service should be the location of the service recipient. While in case the service recipient location is not available in the ordinary course of business, then the place of provision of service will be the location of the service provider. Here confusion arises as to what is the location of service provider or service recipient. This takes us to Rule 2 again, where subsection I of Rule 2 states that defines the term location of service receiver. As per this subsection of Rule 2, the location of service receiver means in case where the service receiver has obtained a single registration for all his place of business, in case he has multiple businesses also, then the place of provision of service would be such registered place, such registered business. In case he is not registered or has obtained a multiple registration for all his businesses, in that case the location of business would be his business establishment, that is his fixed place of business. When the service is provided not in the business establishment or elsewhere, being a fixed establishment elsewhere, then the place of provision of service would be such fixed establishment. Where in case the services are provided from more than one establishment, be it business establishment or fixed establishment, for example, it is provided in more than 2 or 3 places. In such case, the place of provision would be the place of provision where the service is provided is most directly concerned with the provision of the service. In the absence of any of the above mentioned places, the location of the service provider receiver would be the place of his residence. His residence would be considered as his place, the location of the service provider, service receiver. Then what is the location of the service provider? Subsection H of Rule 2 says the meaning of the location of the service provider. This says that it is almost the same as the location of the service receiver, except for that the term service receiver shall be replaced with the term service provider wherever necessary. So this is with Rule 3. So moving on to Rule 4. Rule 4 is based on the place of provision of performance-based services. Rule 4 gives a particular set of services which are called performance-based services, and the location of provision of service in such performance-based services should be the place where the services are actually performed. And what are these performance-based services? Services provided in respect of goods that are required to be made physically available for the recipient of service to the provider of service, or to any person acting on behalf of the service receiver. Where such services are provided from a remote location by way of electronic means to the service receiver, in such case the place of provision would be the location where goods are situated at the time of provision of service. An example for this may be an IT firm in Bengaluru provides service in respect of a software to a Singapore branch of a company by way of electronic means. In such a case, the place of provision shall be Singapore, because the software is located in Singapore at the time of provision of service. It further provides that this clause shall not apply in case of service provided in respect of goods that are temporarily imported to India for repairs, only for the purpose of repairs, and are exported without being used or applied in use in the taxable territory of India. That is, goods are imported for the purpose of repair, they are repaired here and again sent back to and exported for use in somewhere else, but are not put to use in the taxable territory of India. In such case, this clause shall not apply. And the next service, the Rule 4 says is, services provided to an individual by the recipient, where the physical presence, where the personal presence of service receiver or any person acting on behalf of us is required. An example for such services may be service of a beautician, that is a boutique or a beauty parlor, health and fitness services, photography services, etc. This with Rule 4. Now moving on to Rule 5. Rule 5 says the place of provision of service related to immovable property. What may be the service related to immovable property? A few services like provision of accommodation in a hotel, in a guest house, or in an inn, or a club, or a campsite, by whatever name it is called, or the grant of rights to use immovable property, or services of carrying out a coordination of construction work, architectural work, etc. are the services related to immovable property. In case of these services, the place of provision of service would be the place where the immovable property is located or is intended to be located. Example for these services may be interior decoration, architectural services, etc. Moving on to Rule 6. Rule 6 speaks about the place of provision of service relating to events. An example for an event may be this Praram event connected by ICAI. The rule says that the place of provision of service provided by way of admission or organization of a cultural, article, educational, scientific and sporting or entertainment event, or a celebration or a conference or an exhibition or similar events, and service ancillary to such admission should be the place where the events are actually held. For example, in relation to any services held provided during this Praram of ICAI, the place of services will be Bengaluru because the event is held in Bengaluru. So moving to Rule 7, place of provision of service provided at more than one location. This rule says that in cases of services covered in the Rule 4, 5 and 6, in case such services are provided in more than one location, including the location in the taxable territory, then the place of provision of service would be the location in the taxable territory where the greatest proportion of the service is provided. For example, where a beautician is hired for 10 days for a concert to be held in India, USA and Australia, out of which 6 days are spent in India alone, then the place of provision of service would be India, because the majority of the part of the concert was held in India, whichever city may be. So moving on to Rule 8. Place of provision of services where the provider and recipient are located in taxable territory. This is again a basic rule. It is just almost the same as Rule 3, whereas here both the parties to the service are located in the taxable territory itself. In this case, again, the place of provision would be the location of the service receiver. In case the location of service receiver are not evident in the ordinary case of business, that would be the place of the service provider. Okay, so moving on to Rule 9. Place of provision of specified services. Rule 9 specifies certain services called the specified services. In case of such services, the place of provision shall be the location of the service provider. But what are the specified services? Specified services as per Rule 9 are the services provided by a banking company or a financial institution or a non-banking company to account holders. Account holders here means the depositors who accrue interest from the bank, from such banking company or a financial institution, and does not include current account holders. It just means that where the services are provided in the ordinary course of business, those services will be taxed, would come under Rule 9. Whereas if services are provided not in the ordinary course of business, then such services would go under Rule 3. So the next specified service Rule 9 says is online information and database access to retrievable services. Example for such services may be the matrimonial service or the social networking sites, etc. Then intermediate service. What are intermediate services? Intermediate services include the services of commission agents, travel agents, etc. Agents who work for commission for services and not for goods. Because the service tax, it only includes commission agents for providing services. The next specified service is the service consisting of hiring of all means of transports other than aircrafts, vessels, except yachts, after a period of 1 month. An example for this may be where a real estate company located in Karnataka has hired 10 cars for taking customer around the various plots available from Mr. A of Maharashtra, say for a period of 15 days. In such case, the place of provision of service would be the place of the service provider, that is Maharashtra, not Bangalore, because Mr. A in this case is located in Maharashtra, from whom the services of renting is taken. For better understanding of intermediary, we go to Rule 2 again. Subsection F of Rule 2 defines intermediary as a broker, an agent, or any other person by whatever name called who arranges or facilitates the provision of service between two or more persons, but does not include a person who provides a main service or supplies the goods on his account. So this clears what an intermediary means. Moving on to Rule 10. Rule 10 speaks about place of provision of goods transportation services. Rule 10 says that the place of provision of services of transportation of goods other than by way of mail or courier shall be the place of destination of goods. An example would explain this rule better. Take an example of Mr. A of Bengaluru who imported goods from Mr. Z of USA. Services of shipping company USA taken by Mr. A for bringing the goods to Mangalore port are the services covered. So here the service provider is a shipping company and service recipient is Mr. A who is located in Bengaluru. Therefore, the place of provision of goods in such service shall be the destination of goods, that is Mangaluru, because the port is located in Mangalore. It further says that provided that the place of provision of service of goods transport agency shall be the location of person liable to pay tax. Goods transport agency, yes, the same goods which are covered under the reverse charge mechanism. In such cases, the place of provision of service would be the person liable to pay tax. An example for this would be ABC, a goods transport agency located in Bengaluru, transports a consignment of XYZ Limited, Chennai, to the premises of Mr. Z, a dealer from Kolkata. As per mutually agreed terms between ABC and XYZ, the dealer in Kolkata shall pay the freight. Therefore, the place of provision of service would be Kolkata, because the freight is to be paid by the party in Kolkata, by the dealer Mr. Z, who is located in Kolkata. Moving on to Rule 11. Rule 11 speaks about the place of provision of passenger transportation services. The place of provision in respect of passenger transportation services should be the place where the passenger embarks the conveyance for a continuous journey. It is a simple rule. An example would explain it better. Take an example where Mr. A boards an AC coach of the Bengaluru-Delhi Express at Solapur. Though the destination of the journey is Delhi and the train is from Bengaluru, the place of provision of service in case of Mr. A would be Solapur, because he boards the train only in Solapur. Moving on to Rule 12. Rule 12 speaks on place of provision of service provided on board of conveyance. Rule 12 speaks about services which are provided on board during a conveyance. Rule 12 says that place of provision of services provided on board a conveyance during the course of passenger transport operation, including services intended to be wholly or substantially consumed while on board, shall be the first scheduled point of departure of that conveyance of the journey. Example for better understanding of Rule 12. Just imagine a movie on demand service is provided as an onboard entertainment during the Bengaluru-Colombo flight. During the Bengaluru-Colombo, you don't have direct flights to Bengaluru to Colombo, so consider a flight which goes from Bengaluru to Hyderabad and then to Colombo. In such case, if the onboard movie is provided as an onboard service during the leg of Bengaluru to Hyderabad, then the place of provision of service as per Rule 12 would be Bengaluru, because that is the place where the flight departures actually, irrespective of which leg the service is provided, the place of departure of the flight shall be the place of provision of service. So these are the main rules. Now going to Rule 13. Rule 13 is just a general rule. It says that the central government shall have powers to notify description of services or circumstances for certain purposes. In order to prevent double taxation or non-taxation of the provision of services, or for the uniform application of rules, the central government shall have the power to notify a description of service or circumstances in which the place of provision shall be the place of effective use and enjoyment of a service. It only says that the central government has all the powers to describe services or circumstances where the point of taxation, the place of provision of service may change. Now moving on to Rule 14. Rule 14, as earlier told, is an additional clarity in case a confusion prevails in the application of the above mentioned rules. Rule 14 is called the order of application of rules. It says notwithstanding anything stated in any rule, where the provision of a service prima facie determinable in terms of more than one rule, it shall be determined in accordance with the rule that occurs later among the rules that merit an equal consideration. An example would clear all your clarifications regarding Rule 14. Take an example where an architect based in Bengaluru provides services to an Indian hotel chain whose main plane of business is Mumbai in respect of its newly acquired property in Dubai. Here the service provider is the architect in Bengaluru who is in the taxable territory. The service receiver is the hotel chain that has a main place of business in Mumbai, which is again the taxable territory. Whereas the immovable property where the actual services are provided, actual architectural services are provided, is in Dubai, that is outside the taxable territory of India. Therefore, two rules equally apply in this case. First comes Rule 5, in which the place of point of services shall be the location of the immovable property, that is Dubai. In such case, there will be no service tax liability because it is located outside the taxable territory. Whereas even Rule 8 also applies to this particular example, which says that the location of service receiver within the taxable territory shall be the place of provision of service. In that case, the location of the service receiver would be Mumbai, which is in the taxable territory and is very much liable to service tax. So when such cases where two or more rules seem right to the case, the Rule 14 says that the place of provision of service shall be the place of provision of service as per the rule that occurs later. So in this case, Rule 8 comes after Rule 5. So Rule 8 would be the effective rule, which says that the location of service receiver is the place of provision of service. That is, Mumbai would be the place of provision of service. So these are the rules, the place of provision of service rules, amended Rules 2014. That is. So with the help of these place of provision of service rules, one can easily identify the place of provision of service for a purpose of determining the taxability of a service. The organization can use these rules for reviewing their business transactions and contracts to ensure that the service tax liability become the minimum. After all, chartered accountants are meant to reduce the tax liability. So the chartered accountants require knowledge of these places of point of service in order to satisfy the client by reducing their tax liability, by choosing the various permutations, various alternatives available. So these are the place of provision of service rules. I would like to thank ICAI for giving me this opportunity, the Bangalore branch of ICAI for giving me this wonderful opportunity. So with this, I hope my presentation has provided at least a brief knowledge about the place of provision of rules to all the people. Thank you.